That old kettle you were about to toss in the scrap pile, stop your hand right there. Look inside it. See that dark, crusty black coating clinging to the metal? That stain you always thought was ruining it? That is the single most valuable thing in your whole workshop, and almost nobody knows why. Here is the claim I'm going to prove to you. A rusty $5 kettle, rebuilt the right way, will protect and finish your steel tools better than a $100 bluing kit sold in every hardware store. That should not be possible. A dented old kettle beating a precision product? I refuse to believe it too. But the Japanese figured this out almost 400 years ago. There is a real name for the method. There is a dated workshop record behind it. And the finish it leaves is so tough it survived on iron armor, on sword fittings, even on human teeth for centuries. I promise you the whole secret before this is over, a named technique, a documented date, and a recipe you can brew tonight from what's already on your bench. And it works on any rusty steel you already own, not some special tool you have to go buy. Let me tell you where this started. Last winter I had two kettles side by side on my cold garage bench. One was a shiny stainless thing I'd paid good money for. The other was a beat-up cast steel kettle I found at a flea market for pocket change, black as coal inside. Within a month the expensive one had orange rust weeping down its seams. The ugly black one didn't have a single fresh spot. That made no sense to me, and I couldn't let it go. So I started tearing into the why. And every layer I peeled back only made the mystery deeper. Here's the first thing that broke my brain. I always thought rust was rust. One enemy. One orange, flaky, tool-killing disease you scrub off and spray over. That's what I was taught. That's what every product on the shelf sells you. But that is a lie of simplification, and it's costing you tools right now. There isn't one rust. There are two completely different iron oxides, and they behave like opposite creatures. The orange, flaky kind you know and hate is called ferric oxide, and chemists write it as Fe2O3. It's loose, it's porous, it holds water against the metal like a wet sponge, and it keeps eating deeper and deeper until your tool is lace. That's the rust that destroys. But there is a second oxide, and this one is black. It's called magnetite, Fe3O4, and it does the exact opposite. It's dense, it's stable. It bonds so tightly to the steel underneath that water and oxygen can't get past it. It doesn't feed the corrosion, it stops it cold. It's a shield. That black crust in the bottom of my flea market kettle wasn't damage. It was armor. Years of boiling had converted the surface into magnetite, and that magnetite was the reason it wouldn't rust through while my expensive kettle rotted in a month. Now sit with the size of that for a second. Every rust remover, every wire wheel, every acid dip you've ever used strips away the black protective oxide right along with the orange rot. You've been sanding off the very shield that would have saved your tools, and then paying for a spray to replace what you just destroyed. I proved it to myself with a simple test. I took a rusty old flat file, one I'd written off as junk, and I boiled a patch of it in plain water in that kettle for about 20 minutes. The orange fuzz turned dark. When I dried it and rubbed it down, that patch had gone a deep gunmetal black, and months later, that's the only stretch of the file that hasn't rusted again. So the first layer of the mystery cracks open like this. The kettle isn't valuable because it boils water. It's valuable because boiling water is exactly the condition that turns destructive red rust into protective black armor. But that only raised a bigger question, and this one kept me up at night. If boiling water alone can do that, why is the finish on a real Japanese iron kettle so much blacker, so much tougher, so much more even than anything I could get from plain water? What were they adding that I wasn't? Because here's where it stops being an accident and starts being a method somebody perfected on purpose. Let me put a name and a date on it, because this is the clue that turned everything for me. In the town of Morioka, up in the Iwate region of northern Japan, there is an ironware tradition called Nanbu Teki. The records trace the kettle makers to around 1625, when the ruling Nanbu clan brought master casters into the castle town specifically to make iron tea kettles 400 years ago. And those kettles are still black, still protected, still passed down through generations without rusting away. Now think about what that means against your own experience. You've thrown out steel that lasted you 5 years. These people made iron kettles that outlast the person who bought them, and the difference isn't better iron, it's the finish. The Nanbu masters didn't just boil their kettles and hope. They deliberately baked the iron and treated the surface to force that protective black oxide. And then they went one step further with something plant-based that made it darker and far more durable. They controlled the reaction that I had stumbled into by accident. And here's the part that started to make me angry. This isn't secret science. Rust conversion by boiling has been documented in Western gun shops for over 100 years too. It's the old process behind what they call rust bluing, where you deliberately rust a barrel, then boil it to turn that rust black, then card it back and repeat. Gunsmiths were doing it in the 1800s. The chemistry has been sitting in plain sight the whole time, so why did nobody tell you? Why does every shelf sell you a rust remover and a rattle can, but nobody sells you the thing that actually makes iron last 4 centuries? My boiled file was black, sure, but it wasn't as deep or as even as I wanted, and in humid weather a little orange still crept back at the edges. Something was missing. The Nanbu masters had a second ingredient, and until I found it, my finish was only half as tough as theirs. So let me pull back the next layer, because this is where the plant chemistry comes in, and it's genuinely beautiful. The missing ingredient is tannin, tannic acid, the same bitter compound in strong tea, in oak bark, in chestnut hulls, in the skins of unripe fruit. And when tannin meets iron, something remarkable happens. Tannic acid reacts with iron to form a compound called iron tannate ferric tannate, and it comes out a deep blue-black, almost like ink. In fact, that's not a coincidence. For over 1,000 years, the standard writing ink of the Western world was iron gall ink, made from exactly this reaction, tannin from oak galls mixed with iron salts. Some of those manuscripts are still readable after 1,000 years, because iron tannate is stable and permanent. Now here is why that matters for your rusty tool. When tannin soaks into red rust, it doesn't just sit on top. It converts that loose orange ferric oxide into a tight, black, bonded layer of iron tannate that grips the steel and locks out moisture. It neutralizes the active rust and turns it into protection in the same stroke. This is the actual chemistry behind those pricey rust converter liquids you see. Most of them are just tannic acid and a little phosphoric acid, sold to you at a premium in a fancy bottle. But the old way is stronger, because the old way combines both reactions at once. Heat drives the surface toward magnetite, while the tannin builds iron tannate on top of it. You get a double-layered black finish, the hard oxide shield underneath, and the sealed tannate skin on top. That's what makes a real Nanbu kettle so much blacker and tougher than my plain boiled file. They were running both reactions together. And where does the perfect vessel come in? Your old kettle. It's cast or heavy steel, so it holds a steady, even heat. It's built to bring liquid to a rolling boil and keep it there. Its spout gives you a controlled pour, so you can top up the water without disturbing the part. It's already lined with the very oxide you're trying to grow, so it seeds the reaction. There is no better brewing and heat-treating pot for this on earth, and you were about to throw it out. I ran the numbers on that alone. A small bottle of commercial rust converter runs around $15 to $20 and covers a couple of square feet. A box of tea bags and a kettle you already own converts and blackens tool after tool for pennies each, and it grips harder because you're heating it, not just wiping it on cold. So the second layer clicks into place. It's not boiling alone, and it's not tannin alone. It's both heat and tannin working together in the one vessel built to hold both. The kettle isn't a leftover. it's the reactor. But I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now, because I thought it too. You're looking at your own kettle and telling yourself this only works if you've got some fancy cast iron Japanese tetsubin, some special heavy pot, and yours is just a cheap dented thing with a plastic handle. So this next part is built for you, the person with the plain, worn, unremarkable kettle, because that's the whole point. Listen close, because you do not need a special kettle. You need the ugliest one you've got. Because there is no money in a finish you can brew from a kettle and a handful of scrap. Somebody profited every time you stripped the good oxide off and bought a spray to hide the bare metal. The confusion was convenient. And the longer you believed rust was just one enemy, the more you kept paying to fight it the losing way. That flea market kettle was quietly holding a 400-year-old answer, and I'd almost thrown mine in the bin. If you're the kind of person who wants to go even deeper into the full history, the chemistry broken down layer by layer, and the exact step-by-step methods for treating every tool type you own, I put all of it into a book called Tool Mind, and there's also Toolmaster and Steel Instinct if you want to go further down the rabbit hole. Everything I've spent years figuring out in the workshop is written out clearly so you can use it the same day you read it. You'll find the details in the description below, but knowing that boiling makes black oxide still wasn't the full secret. If your kettle is thin, cheap steel, that's fine, you're not casting iron, you're heating water. Any kettle that reaches a boil works. If it's enamel or stainless inside and it won't grow its own oxide, that's fine too, because you're going to bring the tannin and the iron to the water instead. And if your kettle is the throwaway kind with a plastic base you can't put on open flame, you just boil the water separately and pour it into a heat-safe tin or an old steel pot. The kettle still earns its keep as your brewing and pouring vessel. Here's the version anyone can do this weekend with what's on the bench. Take your rusty tool, a file, a chisel, a plane blade, a pair of pliers, a machete, anything steel. Knock off the loose, flaking rust with a wire brush, but do not sand it back to bright metal, and this is the part everyone gets wrong. That surface rust is your raw material. You want it lightly rusted, not stripped. The old orange is what converts to black. Now brew your tannin strong. Boil water in the kettle and steep 4 or 5 plain black tea bags until it's dark as coffee, or if you've got oak, chestnut, or even a handful of acorns crushed up, boil those instead. That's real bark tannin, exactly what the old crafts used. Let it cool just enough to handle. Then wet the whole tool with that tannin brew and let it sit. You'll watch the orange rust go dark, then blue-black, right in front of you over the next 10 or 15 minutes. Wet it again. Keep it damp with the tannin for an hour if you want it deep. Every pass builds more iron tannate. For the tough version, do it hot. Suspend the small tool in the near-boiling tannin water in an old steel pot. Top it up from the kettle's spout as it evaporates, and let it go 20 to 30 minutes. Heat plus tannin, both reactions at once, just like morioka. When you pull it out, dry it completely, don't wipe hard, and while it's still warm, rub in a thin coat of any oil you've got. Linseed, mineral oil, even cooking oil. That oil sinks into the porous black layer and seals it. What you're left with is a matte, black, rust-resistant tool that looks like it came out of a professional shop, done with a kettle, tea, and oil. No electricity beyond a boil. No chemicals from a store. No special machinery. I've done it on the tailgate of a truck with a camp stove. And here's the honest part, because I promised you honest numbers. The first time I tried this, I ruined it. I sanded the tool down to bright bare metal first, because instinct told me clean was better, and the tannin had almost nothing to grab, so it came out a weak gray smudge. The rust is not the problem, the rust is the ingredient. Once I stopped fighting that, the finish went jet black. So now you've got a real working upgrade in your hands no matter what kettle you own. But I've held back the best part on purpose, because there's one more layer to this, the specific old technique that makes this finish not just black, but genuinely armor grade. This is the thing that pushed a cheap kettle past the expensive kit for me, and it comes with a name and a date. Here it is, the secret finale I promised you. The Japanese didn't only use plant tannin on iron. They perfected a two-part treatment where they first made an iron-rich liquid, then combined it with tannin, and the reaction that produced was blacker and more durable than either one alone. That iron liquid has a name. It's called kanemizu, iron water, and it was made by soaking scrap iron in vinegar and tea until the acid dissolved the iron into solution. And this points to one of the most extraordinary documented traditions in the world, ohaguro. For over 1,000 years, going back to the Heian period before the year 1000, people in Japan used ohaguro to blacken things permanently, and the recipe was exactly this. Iron dissolved in vinegar and tea to make a dark iron tannin liquid, painted on and reacted until it turned deep, glossy black. It was famously used to blacken teeth, and here's the detail that stopped me cold when I read it. The blackening didn't rot the teeth, it protected them. The iron tannate coating actually sealed the enamel and prevented decay. That same chemistry was used on iron temple fittings, on lacquered armor undercoats, on the black hardware of old buildings, precisely because it stopped iron from rusting. A finish so tough and so protective, they trusted it on the human body and on iron meant to survive centuries in the open. That is the missing piece that makes your kettle crush the store kit. You make your own kanemizu. You take a wad of steel wool or a handful of clean, rusty scrap, and you drop it into a jar of ordinary vinegar. Let it sit for a few days to a week, loosely covered, until the vinegar goes brown and the steel wool half dissolves. That brown liquid is iron acetate, your iron water. Strain it. Now you brew your strong tannin in the kettle, the black tea or the oak or the acorns, hot and dark, and you bring the two together on the steel. Wet the tool with the tannin first, then brush on the iron water, and the surface turns black almost instantly, right before your eyes, because you force the iron tannate reaction with a massive dose of iron instead of waiting on surface rust to supply it. That's why it beats the $15 bottle. The commercial converter only has as much iron as your rust happens to provide. The ohaguro method floods the reaction with dissolved iron, so the black layer builds thicker, faster, and more even, and it bonds like it was born there. Layer the tannin and the iron water 2 or 3 times, warming the part between coats with hot water from your kettle, and you build a finish with real depth. Then you seal it exactly the way the Nanbu masters sealed their kettles. While it's still warm, a thin wipe of oil, and let it cure. What you end up holding is a matte to satin black steel tool, rust-resistant, hard-wearing, made entirely from vinegar, scrap iron, tea, and a kettle you almost threw in the trash. Let me walk you through the whole thing start to finish. Because this is the payoff and I want you to nail it the first time. Save your rusty scrap and steel wool and start a vinegar jar today. That's your kanemizu, and it needs a few days, so it goes first. While that brews, don't strip your tools bright. Knock off only the flaking rust and leave the tight surface rust as your seed. When your iron water is ready, boil your kettle and steep your tannin dark, black tea or bark or crushed acorns. Warm your tool with hot water from the spout. Coat with tannin, then coat with iron water, and watch it go black. Repeat 2 or 3 passes, keeping it warm from the kettle. Dry it fully, then oil it warm and let it cure overnight. That's the 400-year-old Morioka process, running on your bench, for pennies. And here's the whole mystery finally solved, the thing I chased from that cold garage all winter. My expensive stainless kettle rusted, and my ugly black one didn't. Not because one was better metal, but because the ugly one had accidentally grown the exact protective finish the Japanese spent 4 centuries perfecting on purpose. The black crust wasn't ruin. It was the answer. And once I understood that iron plus tannin plus heat turns rot into armor, I stopped throwing away rusty tools altogether, because now every rusty thing on my bench is just raw material for the toughest finish I know how to make. The industry sold you rust as a single enemy and a spray to hide it, because a finish you brew from a kettle and a tea bag can't be put in a bottle and sold to you forever. But a craftsman in Morioka kept it alive in every black kettle he cast, and 1,000 years of Ohaguro kept the chemistry written down, and now it's sitting in your hands, solved. So think about everything that black stain in your old kettle really was. It was never damage you should have scrubbed away. It was a 400-year-old secret, quietly protecting itself, waiting for you to notice, and now that you can read it, that trick has been yours to use all along on every rusty tool you own. You're the kind of person who'd rather understand why a thing works and build the answer yourself than get talked into another spray can that only hides the problem. That's the whole reason you didn't throw the kettle out in the first place. Some part of you already knew that black crust meant something. So here's what I want to know from you. What's the first rusty tool you're going to run through the kettle? A file, an old chisel, a machete, a seized pair of pliers? Tell me exactly which one down in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from while you're at it, because I read them and I answer. And if you crushed rusty scrap or acorns for your tannin, I really want to hear how black it went. If tearing things apart to find the real answer is how you're wired, if you'd rather reclaim the skill than keep getting sold the same fix, then you belong with the crew that does this here. Stick around, because next I'm taking an old rusted hand file that everyone writes off as dead, and I'm going to show you the Japanese recutting trick that makes it bite harder than a brand new one, and it starts with the exact same chemistry you just learned. Don't throw that file out either. Bring it. Before you go, let me tell you where this leads. This video showed you the why, but the real work continues inside my membership, the Workshop Guild. In there you can ask me your own questions, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You'll belong right alongside thousands of tinkerers like you. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel any time, no risk at all.